Hey everyone, welcome back to another special in-studio interview. I am joined by Charlie Gasparino. He is the senior correspondent at Fox Business, a New York Times bestselling author, a New York Post columnist, I love your weekend columns, and author of the new book, Go Woke, Go Broke, the inside story of radicalization of corporate America, and also my friend, a longtime friend.
Yes, longtime friend.
One of my favorite people in the industry.
I knew you when?
Way back when I was just getting started. But
Should I tell the chicken story?
Do not do that. Stop it, Charlie. Okay, we're not going there. There's an inside joke. We're not going there. Look it up on the internet. Okay, the reason I'm actually so excited to have you, not just seeing you and having you on the show, I've wanted to have you forever, is this book. I cannot think of a better time to go read it because I feel like this is also a post-mortem for folks who did not read this before the election. This kind of frames up what went wrong. So let's just start with this week. We are talking on election week. It is November 7th. What do you think happened?
Well, Kamala Harris famously said, and I hope I'm not bastardizing the quote too much, we all need to go woke. Woke is good. She devised a campaign around woke. I know it was Joy and Brat and all this, insane, stupid stuff, but a lot of it was woke. It was embrace of cultural changes, like everything from transing kids to the criminal justice reform, which often gets translated into defunding the police, as you know, when it gets carried out. She was for a big nanny administrative state. She was for open borders, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And if you'd follow my book. Now, the book was written before the election.
You're right. And Biden was still the candidate when you wrote it.
I said, as of now, he's still the candidate. I actually had a feeling.
Yes, that was actually a great line.
Yeah. The American people are rejecting all this stuff as it's being fed to them, force-fed to them in corporate America. And I'll get into exactly why that is and how it manifested itself. But to me, that was a tell. I kept saying to myself, I don't know how somebody can run a campaign on what broad sort of swaths of the American public are rejecting, which is wokeness. They rejected it, whether it's Dylan Mulvaney in a bubble bath, the trans influencer drinking a beer half naked. Beer drinkers don't mind seeing like a real model in a bubble bath drinking a beer, but if it's a trans model, that just rubs them the wrong way. It's so off-brand. So you got to ask yourself, why did Budweiser do it? It was forcing a cultural change. It's part of this force feeding of cultural change by progressives as they populate the advertising industry, the C-suite, the HR departments of big companies. Same with Disney, flicking in gratuitous same-sex kissing scenes in children's programs. There's if you listen, I did a little research. I don't go to the movies much, and I don't watch Buzz Lightyear. But if you do a little research on the Buzz Lightyear same-sex kissing scene. There was no reason for it. It wasn't part of the plot. It just was thrown in there. And it was thrown in there for DEI reasons. You could say the same for Larry Fink, is a guy I greatly admire for being a great investor and entrepreneur, but he embraced environmental social governance investing. He basically forced it on his portfolio companies, which is just about every company, because BlackRock's the biggest asset manager, as part of pushing a progressive agenda, including on the environment. He did it, including at a time when, we needed to drill more oil because of a lot of factors, including higher gas prices because of inflation, the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, you name it. And it made that problem even worse. And there was a backlash against that. So he had to back off it. So I was saying, if it's failing on all these levels, people don't buy ESG funds anymore for a reason. Not here in the U.S., maybe overseas. I was like, how can Kamala Harris make the sale? And she couldn't. And I can tell you this, and I'm writing about this in the Post today, that they did exit polls, the Trump people, on why they won and why she lost. One of the big exit polls came out was that the people they spoke to said, we think the Democratic Party spends too much time on, for example, men competing in women's sports for gender equality, and not enough time on inflation. There's too much of this virtue signaling. And so woke doesn't sell. And what I did essentially was write a book on why companies went there, how it manifested itself in all its gory details, including debates about whether people at Goldman Sachs bankers should eat Chick-fil-A sandwiches because the guy that created Chick-fil-A was a born-again Christian and, in favor of traditional marriage. And then why and how it unraveled. Now, just so you know, the book, it's not a textbook.
No,
I mean, it's
a narrative.
There's definitions, but it's a narrative. And there are scenes, and it's meant to be funny, and it's meant to be because watching CEOs be woke assholes is really fucking funny.
You know what? You open the book with the Chick-fil-A scene at Goldman Sachs, and it immediately draws you. Like, what are these bankers doing? They're debating whether or not you can eat a Chick-fil-A sandwich in the office. Yeah,
I mean, if you think about it, like, okay, so these are associates and junior bankers that have to work the sort of the grunt work that you need to do before you move up the food chain, hopefully to be partner at Goldman. It's a prestigious job working at Goldman. So you process deals and they work around the clock.
Oh, yeah.
You've covered Wall Street for years. You know that it's a grueling life. So you order in, you're sitting there and, what do you eat? Well, a lot of people, I don't eat Chick-fil-A. It's too greasy for me. But, a lot of people love this stuff, right? But it gets a bad rap within progressive communities because the Cathy family that created it they believe in traditional marriage. They're Christians. They give you Sunday off. And so these woke kids literally went at each other's throats so much at Goldman, where Goldman had to step in and break up a literal food fight. The HR department got informed and to figure out whether it's okay to have Chick-fil-A, and they found out, yes, it is. So I should give full credit to my old producer, Lydia Moynihan, who came up with the piece initially. I helped her, edit it. I edited it. I, helped her report it out. And, when we asked Goldman for a statement, they were like, we're not going to, it was like some weird non-denial. And then they were like, well, why do you care about this? And that said something to me. Not the non-denial, but the second part. Why do you care? Because I care about this because what is going on is a cultural transformation at these firms. It manifests itself in that, but also in Goldman giving all its employees a guide on pronouns. And by the way, it's not just like respect your fellow worker. If your fellow worker is trans, be nice to the person, and call the person what he or she wants to be called. And if I notice I use preferred pronouns throughout this.
Yes, you do.
I am not. Listen. I know people that are trans. They're great people. That's not what we're talking about. This and those trans people I know would never be in favor of the force feeding almost at the point of a gun of their lifestyle on others. The trans people I know. There are the activists. I get it, but that's the difference here. And why corporate America sided with the activists. To me, when I started writing this thing, when I started thinking about it, because I started thinking about it amid the whole turmoil, and I think it was 2023 between Budweiser, Target, Silicon Valley Bank, which was a big regional bank, a rock star bank, imploded. A lot of people said, well, look, they were doing DEI seminars and all this ESG stuff while they didn't manage the balance sheet. So all this was coming together, and I tried to figure out why they went there. Now, why they went there, I can't give you like a sort of nut graph answer.
Yeah,
it's much more of a transformation, and it's a confluence of things. It's changes in the C-suite, the type of people. You went from the mean old Jack Welch who cared about shareholder capitalism, top of mind, and Milton Friedman theory, to guys like Jamie Dimon who were much more liberal and progressive, who were talking about stakeholder capitalism. Forces from the outside, these NGOs, these places like the Human Rights Campaign became very big, particularly during the Obama years, enforcing progressive change on companies. They targeted companies, the Center for American Progress as well, and so they were under pressure from them. ESG then comes into vogue because, there is a legitimate concern about the environment. Let's face it, global warming is real, right? But the question is, how much ESG do you go? Does it disenfranchise the working class? As you're forcing ESG, the working class pays the brunt of higher prices of gas prices because they got to go to work every day. Truckers got to do that. And by the way, if you're really into ESG, wouldn't you be embracing nuclear power? How will you get energy for doing all this stuff, including EVs, if you don't have enough electricity? You only get enough electricity without imploding the power grid from nuclear power. And I so that became my book essentially.
Yes. So, by the way, I once got grief over a Chick-fil-A sandwich in a newsroom back in the day.
Really?
I won't say much about it, but I got some grief about liking Chick-fil-A. I mean,
for the same reasons. This is fun. First off, it's my right to eat whatever. It's not like you're eating a cat, to borrow a phrase from Donald Trump. You're eating a Chick-fil-A. Well, it might be cat. I don't know what they put in those things, but you understand what I'm saying, right? It's just, by the way, I've written my book the way I'm speaking to you.
I know you have. Yes,
okay?
I know you.
So what I'm saying to you is that it's your fundamental right to eat whatever the hell you want. They should not be passing judgment. It's part of the woke culture. It's a very crude hammer. And guess what? Most Americans hate it. You get outside elite circles, they hate it. It's being rejected. And now we see every day that people are running away from woke like there's no tomorrow. The last quarter of my book is about this unwind.
Yes, you get into the unwind. Okay. So it takes a lot, I imagine, for you to like come back and write a book. You wrote a New York Times bestseller a decade ago, and you hadn't really written books for a while. So I imagine like this story must have really grabbed you to compel you to want to write it.
Yeah, I used to write books because I had to. I was a grunt journalist, ink stain wretch, and I had to pay the bills. I wanted to buy a house. I wanted to do this. So I wrote between 2003 or 2002, and I would say roughly 2014 or 12, I think. So in about 10 years, I wrote 5 books. So one every 2 years. And then I just said, enough. I make enough money. It's just, nothing's really compelling me to do anything. The last book I did was on Steve Cohen and the insider trading scandals. And it was just like, it was a heavy lift. And I didn't feel like there was enough bang for the buck. It's like I didn't make a difference enough. I actually argued in that book that insider trading is a victimless crime. And I thought by taking this sort of, and I believe that, by the way, by taking this unusual angle, it would sell, and it didn't. And so I was like, I'm done. I just do my job. I have plenty of stuff to keep me busy, and I still do. But this woke thing really got to me. I started covering it, and I said, "There's something there." I had a like-minded agent. His name is Jonathan Brunitsky. He's really smart. He runs a company called Athos. He came to me and put our heads together, and we kind of came up with the concept. And then it was a marathon. Write it in a year. Report it out. Write it in a year. And it is a reported out book. I spoke to everybody.
And you were giving them copies of it verbatim to.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes.
Yeah. And I know you as a reporter. You're very fair.
I'm very thorough. Just the way I do things.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode is sponsored by Public.com. You've probably heard a lot about interest rates in the news lately, but even as rates start to fall, there's still time to earn some of the highest yields we've seen in years. Public.com is a powerful platform for investors who are serious about earning fixed income. Here's a quick rundown of 3 yield accounts you can access on Public. First up, the high yield cash account on Public offers a 4.35 APY with 0 fees. That means every cent is yours. Then there's the Treasury account, allowing you to lock in a guaranteed yield with the U.S. Treasuries, widely considered one of the safest investments for your portfolio. And finally, the newest addition, the Bond account, lets you lock in an impressive yield of 6% or higher. If you're looking to earn some steady income even as rates change, head to public.com/Julia. Lock in your yield while rates are still up. You talk about how a lot of this was coming from the top, like the upper echelon. So where do you think the disconnect is?
It's coming from the top, but also, there is an apparatus that enforces it on everybody else.
How does it work?
Well, as soon as you start buying into these progressive edicts, whether it's DEI, whether it's ESG, you need to there needs to be an enforcement arm for that. And, the CEO needs to buy in, but it needs to be enforced by HR departments. And that's essentially these HR departments increasingly, and I get into this in the book, became these sort of weird politicize. Listen, HR, as far as it used to be, right? Or, okay, you get fired. Here's your pamphlet. Here's your benefits. Oh, you get hired. Here's your benefits. Here's the employee handbook. You have to, if someone harasses you, you go to HR and you write a report. If you need details about to get your wife or your husband on your health plan, do it through HR. I mean, these are sort of important sort of functions. One of the most important functions of any public company. And it's down the line. I'm obviously leaving a lot out. Sort of pushing progressive change became one of those functions. And it became one of those functions because the CEO class believed it should be. And you had a sea change in the sort of management ethos of public companies. You went from shareholder capitalism that Jack Welch loved, and Milton Friedman developed the theory of shareholder capitalism, which is within the bounds of ethics and legality. Your primary concern is for the shareholder, to stakeholder capitalism. Right. And that shift was cemented. I mean, it was slowly building. And by the way, these ideas often start at places like the UN. They get debated or accepted. But when you're at Davos, trust me, I've been to Davos many times, and so have you. And they all go there. Jamie, Larry Fink, you name it, down the line. And then they get put into sort of corporate behavior. And one of the defining moments was when Jamie Dimon, as head of the Business Roundtable, jettisoned shareholder capitalism for stakeholder capitalism in 2019. And that was the beginning of woke capitalism on steroids. And you could see everything just taken off. And then an important marker in all this was 2020, the George Floyd riots, which I found fascinating because here's the thing. This is a great country. George Floyd didn't deserve the death penalty for trying to pass a phony check is what he tried to do. The cop, we could debate it all day, whether his knee was on the shoulder or on his neck. Did he get a fair trial? Be that as it may, the cop's in jail now, serving like a 25-year sentence or something along those lines. But that is not the norm of this country. That was an isolated incident that was blown up by the left of this country while we were all locked down as something of inherently evil. Now, remember, Trump was in office at the time. We were in the lockdowns. The press was constantly looking for ways to say this country is systemically racist because the guy at the top is systemically racist. They found their lever. And instead of saying, oh, wait a second, guys, this is an isolated instance, America's not systemically racist. What I found was every CEO of a public company, I don't know of any who said, the only one that I know that kind of, sort of bucked that trend was the guy from Coinbase, Brian Armstrong, who said, listen, you come to work to work. We're
not politics.
No politics. But everybody else, Jamie, this shows racism. Brian Moynihan, who runs Bank of America, they all started, David Solomon, the guy from the Chick-fil-A debate, who runs the company, Goldman Sachs, the big prestigious firm. This guy spends his weekends in the Hamptons, particularly in 2020, spinning records at these, fancy schmancy parties. He comes out with stuff about how he's, he wants to apologize to everybody who's the victim of systemic racism. I mean, these are bankers. I mean, he doesn't know who these people are. Companies had CRT, critical race theory seminars during this time. They were force feeding, a warped vision of how America was a systemically racist company. They were bringing in people like Robin DiAngelo, who literally believes the country is evil. Literally, she's a critical race. She's a anti-racism scholar. Ibrahim Kendi, who started a anti-racism institute at Boston University, which would later nearly implode because they didn't know what they were doing. He would give speeches to corporations. I mean, you go down the line. It was like a brainwashing, and within a year, people were going nuts. And people like Chris Rufo were writing about it at the Manhattan Institute. I was writing about it, and when we started to expose it, and it was mostly what you might deem the non-traditional media. Most reporters agree with this stuff. But when when you say me at the Post, Chris Rufo at the Manhattan Institute, us following his reporting at the Post, and others started writing about this, you just saw people saying, whoa, that's right. It's sick and we don't want to be part of this. And you got to ask yourself, why did Jamie go there? They still, I address it in the book. They still can't answer that. What was really fascinating about the book, about the Jamie Dimon response, because I like Jamie. I've known him for years. I laughed with him. I say, when I see him, I said, we knew each other when neither of us had gray hair, and we both do have gray hair now. So Jamie was photographed during this time. Besides making all these statements about how systemically racist, the country is, or suggesting as much, he started a $30 billion racial equity fund to just throw money at what he claimed were underprivileged communities. Like, these are communities that get a lot of money anyway. But be that as it may, he was pushing this agenda. And then lo and behold, and this was like, I want to say in June, July 2020, he went to a branch in Mount Kisco, New York, which is a pretty Tony suburb of New York, of New York City. I grew up near there, in the less Tony Yorktown Heights. Home. By the way, a little bit of trivia. That's where AOC grew up. And he was photographed taking a knee. And, while they photographed him, because he was visiting these branches during the unrest of the time, the social justice, protest, the unrest. And we all asked, why are you taking a knee? Are you, siding with Black Lives Matter right now? And the word we got from JP was like, we're not going to comment, but believe what you want. So they were tacitly signaling yes. So we all wrote that. When I wrote the book, fact checking, I get this call from them. One thing we need to check, they were, fact checking. And this one thing about the knee, he wasn't taking a knee for Black Lives Matter. He was taking a knee to fit in the photo. And I thought it was such a lame excuse. I was like, I basically fell off my chair. I said, okay, so it took you 3 years and probably numerous complaints about that photo, and the fact that Black Lives Matter, as I point out in the book, is not exactly the paragon of virtue that they claim to be, to come up with that. And they, yes, can you take it? I said, no, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to put your explanation in and say that you changed after 3 years, which is what I did.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned Yorktown Heights, and I know you, and a lot of folks they see on TV, they might not know you or your full story. Can you share a bit more about your story? Because you are, in my opinion, like you're an American success story.
Yeah. So I was born in the Bronx. I lived there till about 6, 7 years old. My father was an iron worker and a bartender and a cab driver. He did 3 jobs to buy a small house in Yorktown Heights. We didn't live in a particularly great area. I mean, it wasn't like crime ridden, but it was, a working class area. It's still there. The UPS plant was behind us. The car wash was behind us. It was a 1,000-foot square house, 1689 Summit Street. I'll never forget it. And my father bought it for like $16,000. And, we borrowed a few bucks from my grandmother to get 20% down. Neither of my parents really finished high school. My dad went to technical school in the Bronx. He went to Samuel Gompers High School. My mother dropped out of high school when she was 16. She was a secretary for, back then, Nabisco. Like she was kind of like, you ever see Mad Men with all those women?
Yeah, typing. Yep.
That was my mother. She could type like 1,000 words. I mean, just, I don't know exactly how much, but really fast. Mm-hmm. And, we lived in an apartment before we went there in the Bronx on Bruckner Boulevard. I'll never forget. It's odd because it's funny, not odd, but it just shows you go full circle. I often take a car in from the city and I go right past the apartment I lived when I was a kid. And it's kind of nice. And so they were, working class people. My father's vision for me was to get a Teamster book at the UPS plant. Because if you got a good union job in his mind, you can do, you can have a family, you got benefits. And I knew a lot of people that went there and did that. I knew people that worked on the assembly line the I think it was the Ford plant the GM plant in Tarrytown, making decent money when you get out of school. But I wanted something different. I like to read. I like to write. I wasn't particularly good at writing, but I got better. And so I just studied hard. I went to college and I worked my way through Pace University. It's the only college I could probably get in. I did get into Westchester County Community College, and Iona. I got into Iona, Westchester. I only applied to 3. I was like, that's.
You went to Mizzou too.
I did really well at Pace, where I did get in. I wanted to go to graduate school. I took a year off.
Mm-hmm.
I worked construction during the day a lot, and at night I covered city council meetings for some weekly newspapers. I would write sports. Cover high school basketball games. I just did it because I wanted to. This is what I wanted to do for a living. I was the editor of the Pace paper, and it was hard to get a job then. Coming out of Pace University, it was known as a business school. So I needed to work. So I busted my ass doing construction during the day. I would cover city hall council meetings at night, a few days a week, and then I got into Mizzou. And it still is one of the best, J schools in the country. I went there with a typewriter, a bag of clothes. I got some scholarship money. I saved up some money, and it was like one of the best experiences of my life because I got this like really quality education. Where what I liked about Mizzou is, and this is why I can't understand why journalism has gone so woke, is like my professors were all liberal. But they were like really open-minded. Like they were like, oh, that's Charlie, the conservative, haha. But they would debate you and they wouldn't fail you for being conservative or to have a view. And they were really more focused on the craft, the trade of journalism. Make sure you get stuff right and, make sure you understand stuff. And I had a great mentor there, a guy named Jimmy Gentry. He went on to, I think he ran the journalism department. He ran the business journalism program. And it was a kind of a little pact I made with my father, who had just died. And, my dad died. How old was I? He died in 86. So I was, 23, 24. And I buried him. And then I went to Mizzou.
So he didn't get to see.
No. My mom died a few years later. So I was in my 20s when I buried both of them. But I made kind of a pact with him. I would do business journalism because I said, maybe I can get a job as a flack and rewrite press releases for IBM. And so Jimmy Gentry, he was kind of a mentor to me, said, listen, if you really want to do this, take all your electives in economics. So I already had, economics 101, right? The early, the sort of introductory course as an undergrad. And I took 4 or 5, the equivalent of a minor, econ courses, undergrad. Instead of like the history of journalism, you have to take that. But instead of journalism electives, I made sure I took all econ electives, and it was the best thing I did. And then I got out of Mizzou. I want to say in '89. I didn't really owe any money because I went on my savings, and then I got scholarships, and I work study. And I got jobs because business journalism was become this huge thing after the '87 stock market crash. And then I worked my way. And by the way, I still worked my way up from the bottom. I didn't get to the Wall Street Journal until 1995.
Yeah.
And I worked at a lot of jobs before that. And then I transitioned to TV because, again, I wanted to pay the bills.
Yeah. And you are a reporter in every sense of the word. Let me ask you about the state of media today. What's your assessment?
Not good.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing is very smart. I think this is the future. I think people, listen, where do I get my information from? Well, I read tremendous. I'm in cable TV, but I don't watch cable TV. Mm-hmm. Now, I work out a lot,
Right, yes, you do.
So I listen to podcasts like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to yours. I listen to Joe Rogan. I mean, I get more out of it hearing really smart people. And not just Joe, Bridget Fedesi I listen to Glenn Lowry and John McWhorter a lot. I mean, I don't want to leave anybody out. I listen to Tucker Carlson.
You listen to Megyn Kelly?
I listen to Megyn. I listen to Tucker Carlson. I listen to Barry Weiss, Ben Shapiro, Jocko Willink, Sean Ryan. I mean, they have amazing people that when Joe Rogan sits down with Elon Musk for 3 hours, you get like this data dump from Elon Musk, which is just fascinating.
And not only that, but now presidential candidates sitting down, Trump sitting down.
Yes.
Do you think that seems like that is going to be the future if you want to get elected? Doing the podcast rounds.
Yeah.
Yes. And doing it really unscripted.
Well, I think if you're in the information economy, which I make money through information, that's how your viewers make money. Information, whether it's financial or medical or scientific. I mean, that's kind of like how the world works. If you're in that, if you need information, if you want to talk about the weather, you can listen to New York One. Okay. But if you need information, I don't know how you get that information without deep dive reading, which is what I do. And I do read everything. Like I read the Times. I force feed myself Paul Krugman, even though I don't agree with anything he says. But I try to get that other perspective. But if you're going to do any other media, I don't know how you sit there and watch cable TV. I shouldn't say this because they pay my rent, because there's just not enough information. Like you don't have enough time. It's
sound bites.
It's 2 minutes. I mean, it's good for breaking news, but if you want to really understand something, hear Elon change your life a little bit in terms of how he sees the future of Starlink and these various technologies that he's pushing. If you want to understand, your guest, Mark Benioff, where he sees the future of technology and you do need an hour to listen to these guys.
Yeah, I like the longer form. That was always my thesis, was that especially in investing, people wanted to learn. Right. And this stuff's complicated. All right. But how about newsrooms? You mentioned that they're being more activists these days.
Well, I think the schools produced, the elite schools, whether it's the Ivy Leagues or even the journalism schools. I don't want to speak for Missouri anymore. I don't know what's exactly is going on there. I have my theories, but the elite schools have produced students that are much more progressively activist, and they forget, if you're going to go into this business, this is really about providing information. Mm-hmm. I mean, listen, you can be a muck. Listen, I've written. I'm a muckraker a little bit. I write tough stories. You can hold the feet to the fire of the rich and the famous. You also got to be fair, but you're also got to break news, and you got to be. Your ultimate goal is not to be an activist. Your ultimate goal is to inform the public. And I think it got away from all that. Now there are vast change, and what's interesting is that getting away from that sort of goal coincided with a sort of disintermediation of the traditional media to less traditional forms. People, cutting the cord, getting their stuff from podcasts, getting stuff on social media, not through these traditional, not reading the Washington Post. And I think those two trends together are really bad for what's known as the mainstream media right now. It's going to be crippling. It's inexorable. I mean, listen, the New York Times, I'm sure, will be there in 10 years. I won't give it any more than 10 because who knows. The Washington Post will be there in 10 years, but slowly. You see, here's the thing. You don't need two New York Times. The Washington Post is going to be the same activist newspaper as the New York Times. People just watch the New York Times. You don't need that. And that, by the way, then over time, people might look at the New York Times and start moving it. By the way, they had a lousy quarter recently. They sold less digital subscriptions. This is part of that. And yeah. I wonder, is there a business model? I go back and forth thinking, okay, if someone said, I want to do middle of the road news, just news, is there a business model for that? Or is it just the business sucks and, you're fighting the last battle that, stuff is coming to, the news is going to be divided between podcasts and instantaneous stuff on Twitter, where I can move a stock on Twitter. In the old days, I used to, particularly during the financial crisis, I broke a lot of stories.
Broke a lot of news.
But I moved the market once when I broke the TARP story within like a minute, 500 points. It was the bottom third of CNBC. Now Twitter takes that over.
Yeah. And you still break a lot of news, Charlie. How about like newspapers no longer doing or something like Washington Post, for example, no more endorsements. What do you make of that during election season?
I just don't think. Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're Bezos, so Bezos is very rich, right? What, 200 billion now?
I don't know the number, but he's definitely top 3, I think.
Yeah,
I
so he gave some of it to his ex-wife. Elon's the richest at what, 300 billion or 4?
I don't
can't
even
remember.
keep track. How bad is that?
It's hard to keep track now. It's hard to believe Warren Buffett is not the richest guy anymore, or Bill Gates. But these guys are really rich. That said, Jeff Bezos doesn't want to lose $100 million a year, and the Washington Post was losing between 75 and 100 million a year. And he's not in the business of subtraction; he's in the business of addition. So his theory was, why double down and draw attention to ourselves? Let's be nonpartisan. Now, if you think about it, it was kind of what happened was interesting, because then he lost
a lot of subscribers.
And that's the problem with this medium. There is no quick fixes to this.
Yeah.
You're going to lose them. You might gain 1 or 2 conservatives, or you might not gain any conservatives because they hate the Washington Post to begin with. You sullied your reputation because you became an activist arm of the Democrat, which they have been. I mean, this is a great paper. Trust me. There's amazing reporters there. I was offered a job by them in 2002. I was at the Journal. Steve Call, who was the managing editor at the time, brilliant guy. I stayed at the Journal. He offered me a job. It was always a place I wanted to work at. But the place changed, it changed dramatically. It became much more activist, Woodward and Bernstein would write about anybody. I don't know Bob Woodward very well. I met him a few times. I spoke with him when, for that job, I was thinking of going. But I know Bernstein, and Carl might be a liberal, but he'd write about anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you got to go back to that, but it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
No easy answers here.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to this book, and I read it this week. I finished it this week, but I was reading it started before the election, so it was a little bit of a framework of okay. So I take it the election didn't surprise you necessarily, the outcome. So, okay, where do we go from here then? Is woke over? Is it dead? What happens?
I think the election of Trump put a pretty big nail in the coffin. Trump is, let's just back up what's going to happen sort of in the federal government. From what I understand, and the Trump people are telling me, that there could be an executive order that ends DEI in federal contracting. If the administrative state is no longer pushing woke policies on companies, if the SEC isn't demanding ESG mandates for public companies, like give me your carbon footprint and tell us what it's like for the next 50 years, which is impossible. That's what Gary Gensler wanted to do, something along those lines. That's going to be gone. That ESG mandate is done. Okay, it's not going to be enforced now. The administrative state will not be able to enforce wokeness on companies. It won't be one of the levers. It'll clearly make groups like the Human Rights Campaign, which publishes a DEI index of every company, Center for American Progress, which pushes, corporate wokeness to research, that those activist groups are going to have much less power with Trump in. No power, let's face it.
Mm-hmm.
Trump ran against them, essentially. They ran to defeat him, particularly the Human Rights Campaign. Jamie Dimon, I asked the JP Morgan people, why are you guys involved with the Human Rights Campaign? They're literally a left-wing group that wants to defeat, Trump. And is that really where JP Morgan wants to, take a stance? Don't you want to be nonpartisan? You have, half the country. This is it's more than half the country now, but I said half the country is going to vote for him. They couldn't answer that question. And I wonder if they'll stay connected with sort of radical left groups like that, the sort of progressive left, if that's going to be how they're going to continue to virtue signal. So when you stop it at a federal level, there's less push. There's less push on corporations because all these corporations answer to the vast administrative state. And I think that, on top of the fact that consumers hate it. They hate this stuff.
It's bad for business, I guess.
It's horrible.
Okay.
Disney stock hasn't moved in 10 years.
Mm-hmm. How about AB InBev? Their sales just
so AB
dropped.
InBev is the
Bud Light.
is the Bud Light
Isn't there like some Trump connection of like folks trying to come in and help them out? Yeah.
Well, I talk about this in the book. It's fascinating. So if you know anything about Budweiser, it was, and I know a little bit about this because I went to University of Missouri, as we spoke about, and we used to take road trips to St. Louis because Columbia, where the school is in the middle of the state. So we go to St. Louis and we'd go there. We'd have dinner in the Italian neighborhood, The Hill it was called. And we'd also go visit the Budweiser plant and do a tour, get free beer.
Students get beer, yeah.
That's how kids are, right? So it would be a great time. And it was so American. Like, it was like the Clydesdales and this and that. And this is an old family, the Bush family. It was like generations of the Bushes. They sold out, I want to say in 2009, to AB InBev, which is this sort of Davos-esque conglomerate of Brazilians and Belgians who run it. And I talk about how the cultural ethos of Budweiser, which was iconically American, they might have pushed the envelope a little bit with Spuds MacKenzie and the girls in the bikinis. Remember Spuds MacKenzie would pick up the girls at the bar?
I don't even know who that is.
So Spuds MacKenzie was their famous Bud Light Bud mascot. This like cute, this dog with a big beak, and all the girls loved him. And he used to hang out at the bar. It was just funny. So they had commercials like that. They also had maybe the most iconic commercial I've ever saw after 9/11, where the Clydesdales came up to the Hudson River and you see the Twin Towers missing, and they took a knee.
Wow.
It was just amazing. I mean, I cried when I saw that. I was like, whoa. Because I was there. I was working at the Journal. As a matter of fact, our offices were across from the Trade Center. My dad worked on the Trade Center. But it was so iconically American. And you went from that to a trans woman activist, who I have no problem with. Be an activist all you want. Being your symbol. Drinking Budweiser in a bubble bath. And another social media spot, she was dressed like Audrey Hepburn. And so I wanted to find out how that happened. By the way, that didn't happen. And then my deep dive showed, the company was trying to position this. This was one woke woman.
Yes,
and
who made the comments on the podcast.
Brendan Whitworth is the CEO who gives to Republicans, and he's friends with Don Jr. and he's friends with a lot of people. He's a Republican. He's a former Marine. Good-looking steel. I mean, he's like the last guy you'd think you would be posing, woke, right? With the steel jaw, little scrubble. He looks like a guy that should run Budweiser, right? But he answers to AB InBev. And the thing they tried to say, the excuse was like, this was one woke person in the advertising department. And I know who the woke person is. She's actually a very, very talented marketer who was under pressure to turn their influencers to essentially impose DEI standards on their influencers, and they wanted to go the gender route. And if you go the gender route, Dylan Mulvaney, believe it or not, would be someone you pick. Even though it sounds crazy now, Dylan Mulvaney interviewed Joe Biden months before this went down. She was on red carpets. She was a major trans influencer on talk shows, Drew Barrymore. You'd go there. That's a famous trans influencer. She had like a gazillion TikTok followers and everything. So that didn't wash with me. And then when when Don Jr. came out in favor of it, it just fell flat because the company wouldn't apologize. It was like a weird thing. Mm-hmm. And then Brendan Whitworth came out and basically doubled down on wokeness on the Gayle King show. And then they have never recovered, by the way.
Yeah.
Never recovered. It's still the number 3 beer. It was number 1, Bud Light. Now it's number 3, and sales aren't very good.
I think that's one thing I didn't know the full story. So reading your book, actually, and you're very fair too throughout your book. And all right, so final question for you. I think just kind of big picture, I think it's fair to say this was what we saw this week was a repudiation of woke, if you will.
Absolutely.
I think I saw that as your tweet.
Yep.
What do you think will be the lessons going forward? Do you think we'll see changes on the left even? Just let's talk about more forward looking. Where does this go? What's next?
The progressive left is the sort of, it's not going away. It is the sort of activist wing of the party. So you need activists to do things. If you know anything about politics, I'm not an expert at politics, but what little I know, if you need to organize, if you need to knock on doors, you need your activists. And so it's not going to be that easy for them to just, get rid of in the Democratic Party, get rid of every woke person, because they're there. The problem that they have is like whatever they're cooking, nobody wants to eat, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? It is literally a loser on the business side. And now it's proven to be a loser on the political side. I mean, you got the feeling it was a loser on the political side. I mean, think about it. Joe Biden had, for some reason, and I don't know why, because he's a Catholic, on Easter Sunday, he named it Trans Visibility Day. Now, he didn't replace Easter, the Easter egg roll or whatever with, trans people running around, although he did bring trans people to the White House. And one of them did something pretty remarkably stupid and disgusting. But, that is so tone deaf. And, people sit there. And again, this came out in the exit polling that the Trump people did. You care more about this gender stuff, which doesn't really impact my life. I don't want it enforced on my kids, than inflation. And I think, if the Democratic Party doesn't change, it's going to be as obsolete as Bud Light. Now, here's the interesting thing about Bud Light. They've gone a whole 180, right? Mm-hmm. And it's still not working. And I talked to Dana White about this. They're now in partnership with UFC. And I talked to Dana about this, and he's the head of the UFC. And he said, yeah, we're there, I don't know anything about this woke stuff because I told him about my book and what I was doing. I don't know about it, but I deal with Brendan. I said, well, Brendan Whitworth doesn't run the company. It's these other guys. I don't know those guys. I'm not dealing with them. So then he goes, and they're also going to help us with another project. And I don't know how they're going to brand. This other project is something that is so diametrically opposed to what Dylan Mulvaney brought to the table. It's something called Power Slap. It's literally two guys, huge guys. They chalk up their hands. They sit there and they smash each other in the face. And you see it and they slow motion it. So when it hits the face, you see a puff of smoke. And then all of a sudden the guy either sits there and stays, and then it's his turn to hit the other guy, or he falls down and, just basically passes out. And he goes, and sort of Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch is going to be doing something, some sort of promotion with them. And I thought, and it's still not working. And so I thought there was no better way to dramatize the story full circle than Dylan Mulvaney. And at the end of the book, I talk about Power Slap.
Power Slap. Well, on that note, Charlie Gasparino, so great to see you, my friend. Folks, go pick up a copy of Go Woke, Go Broke. It'll help you understand what went down. Great to see you as always. Thank you so much. Of course.